You know, our observances are always bittersweet, aren't they? I mean, if you haven't been to one before, um, we consider this part of board business to really become more knowledgeable of our own history of institutional racism. So much of it impacts education, our colleagues, and our students. It's now time for our American Indian Alaska Native event. And it's very fitting that we begin with this. It's very timely that we begin with this. Indigenous people of the Americas, North and South, have been subjected to institutional racism since the first European explorer set foot on American soil. The indigenous people have been enslaved, slaughtered, forced, marched off their ancestral land. They've been outnumbered, outgunned, and the enemy was often the government. It is a testimony to indigenous endurance and the refusal to submit to oppression that we even have any indigenous people in our lands today. How many of you saw the Academy Award-winning movie, The Revenant? That was a hard one to watch, wasn't it? That was a hard one to watch. But it was an accurate depiction of the violence that was perpetrated by the white population against the Indian population. And as if the extinction or attempts thereof wasn't enough, in the early 19th and even 20th century, where we like to think we were becoming more civilized, we were still destroying Indian culture and Indian languages. I went to high school in Brigham City, Utah. So Mike and Ed, you know, all right? The Box Elder, bees, all right? So those are my people. And here we were at Box Elder High School, and right down the street was the Intermountain Indian School, a boarding school that had been put there by the U.S. government, where kids, very young children, would be taken away from their parents so that they could, I believe someone described it as scrub them clean of their Indian culture. And that school existed in my lifetime and didn't close until long after I had graduated from high school. We are not talking ancient history here. What's more, whenever the white culture really wanted something that was on the Indian land, that was theirs by our treaties, they simply ignored the treaties, the land, the gold, the game, the water, and took it, disregarding the rule of law that we hold so dear. So let's not delude ourselves. Racial stereotyping, the devaluing of American Indian and Alaska Native culture and their contributions exist to this very day. Today, that crisis in Standing Rock is just the latest. It is about environmental justice. Tribal communities, like all communities, have the right to stand up and defend themselves when they feel that their families, their neighborhoods, their very existence is threatened by corporate interests and political interests. And we have made a strong statement and put it out into the press, and it is the press statement is on the website so that you can distribute it as you feel appropriate, talking about our support of Standing Rock, the Sioux tribe, the Sioux nations that have come there and have asked for our support. They have it. The indigenous people have not only endured. Against all odds, the population is growing And among their ranks are people who are dedicated to protecting and celebrating the ancestral way of life and the way to show children why they should be proud and to grow up strong within their own tribal nations. Equally encouraging is that we're seeing a generation of Indian youth activists, and they are standing on the shoulders of their strong ancestors, and they are ready, willing, and very able to fight racial injustice. One of those young Indian activists recently said, "We're here. We have a voice. We're educated. We know how to use 21st century technology to organize, and we revere the traditions of our people." We will see some of those fine young people in the stunning photographs of the artist who is our guest today. We're going to see in her pictures the resilience, the beauty, the vitality of the American Indian culture. And to introduce her is our own board member and chair of the NEA American Indian Alaska Native Caucus, Mary Levi. Why can't I say that? Levi. I can say Levi.
Hello. Asquali, thank you so much, Lily. And thank you to the people of this land who have welcomed us and given us strength to continue our advocacy as strong educators for all. Today I stand before you as the chair of the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus, and we have asked NEA to stand with us in solidarity with Standing Rock Sioux. We asked Lily to write a letter in support to the chairman of the Standing Rock, Sioux, David Archibald, and to show support to the camp schools that are set up at Standing Rock. Today, I would like to call your attention to the press release that was sent on September 28th, 2016. And you'll find it on Ed Justice, which states, "We support the sovereign right of the Standing Rock Sioux Nation to preserve their basic human and civil rights to protect their land, their water, natural resources, sacred sites, and their people." Go to NEA Ed Justice for Lily's statement, and please share that out with everybody back home. Release that to your members, and then call awareness to Standing Rock and what they fight for. There is also information on Ed Justice as to how you can make donations to the Defenders of Sacred Water School, and that has been set up for the youth of the water protectors. We are working with our long-term partner, the National Indian Education Association, in continuing to educate our members with issues of American Indians, Native Americans, and Alaska Native issues. You can see all of this on Ed Justice, and the caucus thanks you all for your support and your awareness of what continues with our Native people. Asquali. With that, okay. Yes?
Doreen McGuire-Grigg, speaking on behalf of all the directors from California. We stand unanimously in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux.
Many of our locals in California have taken this similar position in support of what Mary just read to you, all of you.
And one of those locals is the California Faculty Association. It took a resolution in support of Standing Rock.
Thank you for your continued work for everybody and all of our members.
Thank you.
Tracy Hartman Bradley, Nebraska. We the Hedgehogs 2016 class, freshman class of directors. We appreciate and we thank President Garcia for writing that report, or writing that letter and statement to the press. And we as a group have taken a stand for the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus. We stand in support of Standing Rock.
Thank you. So, this morning, I have the privilege of introducing an amazing speaker, Matika Wilbur. Matika calls the Pacific Northwest her home of the Swinomish and Tulalip. And I practiced that. I did. Tribes. Her academic accomplishments include a bachelor's degree from Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, California, and crafting her skills at the Rocky Mountain School of Photography in Missoula, Montana. Makita started as a certified teacher at Tulalip. I did so bad. Heritage High School in her own indigenous community before devoting herself full-time to documentary photography. Her amazing photographs have been exhibited in numerous museums, including the Seattle Art Museum, the Royal British Columbia Museum of Fine Arts, and the Kitteridge Gallery of the University of Puget Sound, and the Nadas Museum of Fine Arts in France. Her instinctive educating needs has taken her to give ed talks and being interviewed by major medias including NBC, the New York Times, and The Guardian. In 2012, Makita embarked on a journey that has attracted the most attention to her photographs. Project 562 is Matika's national documentary project. Her goal is to photograph Native people from every federally recognized tribe and record oral narratives from each of those tribes. At the time, there were 562 recognized tribes, and now there are 567 tribes. However, there are many more federally unrecognized tribes as well. And so far, she has driven more than 250,000 miles and worn out a small army of interns. Matika's project of 562 shows the astonishing variety of indigenous peoples' presence and reality across the country. Lily talked about institutional racism. Institutional racism takes root when people in one group, the dominant group, see people in another group as somehow less than human. Motika Wilbur's photographs show 21st century indigenous people in their full essential humanity. Her photographs shatter the racial stereotypes that degrade and diminish our native nations. For me, her photographs portray both the strength and the resilience of our people. We are survivors. The photographs also show our vulnerability, but emphasize our joy, our harmonious capacity as living, breathing human beings who think, feel, and love with the entire world around us. Matika has a great gift, and we are so fortunate that she has chosen to share that gift with us. My friends, my family, please give a big NEA welcome to the artist Motika Wilbur.
Hello. Ooh, you're excited. Wake up now, falling asleep in the front row now. All right. Hello, friends. My name is Motika Wilbur. I'm from the Swinomish and Tulalip nations, the Stahobschat. I'm the people of the Tide, which is located along the Coast Salish Sea in Washington State. I'd like to raise my hands to the National Education Association for inviting me, to your leaders, Mrs. Garcia, Mrs. Pringle, and especially to all of you and to my elders in the room. I'd like to tell you thank you. Where I come from, we say, Tigwitsi. It's an offering and a showing of respect. Try it, say, Tigwitsi. Tigwitsi. Ooh, educators, thank you. And before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous ancestors of this land, the Nacotchtunk people. We honor and give thanks for the opportunity to gather on your land. We remember you. So today you have invited me to share my perspective about institutional racism in education. And what can I offer on such a big, giant, enormous idea? For 4 years, I have been sojourning the American road in my war pony, my RV known as the Big Girl. My purpose as an artist and social documentarian, to gather unprecedented portraits and stories from over 562 federally recognized tribes in the United States. We believe Project 562 can change the way we see Native America. We want to drive conversations about how U.S. citizens can evolve beyond the appropriation and neglect of indigenous images and traditions through a new model of awareness with honest photographic representation and direct narratives of America's first people. When completed, Project 562 efforts will result in a dynamic curriculum with associated publications, exhibitions, lecture series, and online sites. So we are already beginning to see a great fruit from our vision, and so it is incredibly gratifying for me to be here with all of you today. Before I undertook this project, I had a great career and routine as a fine arts and commercial photographer and teacher in Washington State, and all my relatives and friends, they asked, oh my God, but why? Why would you want to leave this for the road to live in an RV? Don't you want a husband? And just before I started this work, I had been teaching for several years at the tribal school on my res in Tulalip. And it was during my time here in Tulalip that I buried 19 students in the 4 years that I was a teacher. The toll of addiction, abuse, and unnatural deaths, it overwhelmed me. And after so much loss of potential, I'd sit in lodges with my fellow teachers, and we would pray for our children and beg the Creator to take away the despair. And it was here in those classrooms that I realized that inequality is in fact measured in body count. As Coates says in Between the World and Me, all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, it serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, it blocks airways, it rips muscle, it extracts organs, cracks bone, breaks teeth, and we must never look away from this. We must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, all the regressions, all land with great violence upon our bodies. Over and over and over, I realized that the American dream didn't include us. I realized that when Lincoln said, "for the people," he did not mean Native American people. I came to understand that the core of our curriculum is not based in truth. It doesn't acknowledge our indigenous intelligence. If it did, we would teach Haudenosaunee principles like Ganak Giowehi, how to be of a good mind, a non-judgmental quality of thinking, where becoming a peacemaker or seed keeper or land steward is held at the highest esteem. We would teach interconnectedness. We would teach our children how to walk in light and love and beauty and how to experience fulfillment. That would be at the core of our curriculum. But we still teach our children that Columbus discovered America. We still gather each year for Thanksgiving and tell the story of Indians welcoming the Pilgrims, because of course we would want a new president like Donald Trump. Let's consider the broader educational experience in Native America. For every 100 students that begin 9th grade, only 50 will graduate from high school. 20 of those graduates will go on to higher education, but only one will graduate from college. It takes 2,500 Native 9th graders to create one Native master's graduate, and 7,000 Native 9th graders to create one Native PhD. Hidden in these numbers are the staggering statistics of Native suicides. 1 out of 5 Native male university students will try to kill himself during his college career. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for Native youth aged 15 to 24. And we know that Native youth experience the highest rate of suicide among all ethnic groups in the United States. In fact, I just came from my own res, where I was called back by my former principal, who phoned and said, this was like 10 days ago, Matika, we've already had 5 suicides since school started. Can you come home? We need your light. We need you to come spend time with these kids, talk story with them, inspire them, remind them that it can get better. Will you come? To which I replied, of course I will, because we need this to change. Because our children deserve to live and grow. And to do so, we need genuine, inspirational, indigenous representation and indigenous intelligence to overflow in our classrooms. Maybe this seems too obvious, but psychologist Stephanie Freiberg has found that negative misrepresentations deeply damage the psyche of Native youth. They are as impressionable as all children are and given to stereotypes, depressing how they feel about themselves, their communities, and their potential. And without positive representations, kids underperform and redefine themselves destructively. Shockingly, in the same research, when white youths were shown stereotypical images of Native Americans, their self-esteem was raised. So then how can we create systems of equity and inclusion when the messages we're consuming perpetuate racism? Images matter. So to provide Native youth with such positive imagery and understanding is the main reason I packed my bags in 2012 for Project 562. To date, I have visited over 400 tribes. I've touched down in nearly every state. I've grown and cried and loved and learned how to live in an RV that one time lost its brakes on a mountaintop, and another time I hit a deer, and I even caught it on fire while cooking bacon. But God darn it, I've kept on so that one day, like today, I could share some of that indigenous intelligence, history, and story that I've encountered with folks like you. that we have together, let me share some fundamental lessons I have been given and that you may consider integrating into your understanding and practice as educators. Culture-based education and Western education deserve equal value and resources. This is a photo of Dr. Marilyn Belgard. She's a retired professor of Indian education from the University of New Mexico. She has helped establish multiple charter schools focused on Indigenous education. She has raised funds to support thousands of Native students, and she is very passionate about training culturally competent teachers to work within Indigenous communities. She is well versed in the history of boarding schools and governmentally engineered education systems of assimilation. And during our conversation, she proposed a fundamental educational shift. She looked at me and said, "When are we going to stop asking our children to choose between cultural education and Western education?" I think we are ready to stop the assimilation process. The time to change is right now. Indigenous equals interconnected. I had the privilege of visiting my Kanakamali relative in Hawaii, where I met Kumu Kaea Izan. He's one of the few people who teach in the style of Kia Laleo, a Hawaiian language immersion that has incredible success rates. Students are fluent in Hawaiian within 1 year. The pedagogy is uniquely different because it does not use the written word to teach, but rather uses Hawaiian in its rawest form, the spoken tongue. There are fascinating distinctions between the indigenous language and English. The English language uses nouns in ways that objectify beings. We say, there's a woman over there. There's a man over there. Once the noun does its work, a being or entity is separated from others. The indigenous language, on the other hand, relies on verbing. So instead of saying, there's a woman or a man over there, we say, manning, being a man, is happening over there. Womaning, being a woman, is happening over there. According to Kumu Kaeo, the English use of nouns in other parts of grammar can create a sense of separateness from each other and core elements of life. It is our expression, if our expression is separatist, then our language itself can justify the perpetuation of inequality. We say, well, I'm not Latino or Black or Native or poor or transgender, or that's not my family over there, or that's not my community. Oh, that's not directly affecting my life. Therefore, I am not required to take responsibility for Ferguson or for Standing Rock. I am not responsible to take any sort of action for that noun happening over there. Kumu Kaeo explains that the indigenous Hawaiian language does not allow for that same sense of separatism. We find in other native languages a similar inherent sense of inclusiveness, such as Lakota, Dakota, Nakota utterance Mataquiasin, meaning all my relations, or we are all related. Can you imagine the possibility for social change if we began having American students explore indigenous languages with their distinct conceptions of interconnectedness? How might our communities change? Identity is inextricably connected to the land. Native American land is essential to Native American identity. We are the people of the blue-green water, the people of the tall pine trees, the people that live within the 4 sacred mountains and other such land-based self-awareness. But what happens when our relationship with that land is dramatically changed, and even if we haven't relocated, we feel displaced because the face of Mother Earth around us has changed so dramatically. So a few years ago, I went to visit Mr. Colin Soto in Cocopah. Cocopah is in the Prescott Valley of Arizona. It's the last tribe on the Colorado River right before Mexico. Colin can recall growing up in a mud house with his parents who fished and farmed. And every year, the valley would flood. And he remembers naturally irrigating from that flood for the soil to make for plentiful farming. And he recalls a very happy childhood, playing in the river, running free with relatives, enjoying an abundance of fish and foodstuffs. And then he remembers when the river was diverted, scarcity ensued, and the people moved into hut homes. And he looked at me and he asked, Matika, to be Cocopah is to be the people of the blue-green water. But how can we be Cocopah if there is no more water? Academics now have a term for this crisis of being. They call it solastalgia. It's defined as the mourning we experience when separated from a cherished home. And this is a more visceral and compelling environmentalism, which in most Western thinking and training focuses broadly non-preservation of natural resources, but overlooks people's core relationship with their specific sustaining ecologies. This is not surprising, given the related American idea of social mobility. Native Americans don't roll that way. The prolonged environmental and human holocaust we have experienced, our mourning and grief at such loss, have reached a pivotal moment. Native nations have taken an unprecedented stand together against the destruction of our homelands through the extraction and fouling of Mother Earth. Native people are at the forefront of almost every major environmental protection movement in the United States. In Navajo Nation, we see women protesting against fracking. In Minnesota, there was an intense indigenous resistance to the Keystone Pipeline. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous people say shale no to the coal exports in the Salish Sea. In New Mexico, Apaches gathered to protect Oak Flats. In Florida, there was the indigenous advocacy to restore the Everglades. And at this moment in Standing Rock, North Dakota, there is the largest gathering of the modern era of Native American tribes and peoples of the world, environmentalists and human rights advocates for the peaceful protection of Miniwichoni, which means water is life, against the DAPL pipeline known as the Black Snake. That threatens so much of the quality and sense of life in the Midwest and all over, really. Impromptu schools have been organized to foster environmental education of hundreds of youths participating in the protection of the Missouri River as part of human-based stewardship for all Americans. So I've been out in Standing Rock for about a month and a half now. And I've been on the front lines where I stood next to Amy Goodman while I was pepper sprayed and bit by attack dogs for standing to protect something that was incredibly sacred to our people. I watched as Dakota Access Pipeline dug up the bones of their ancestors, and I stood there in prayer with Orville Looking Horse and thousands of other nations in tears, begging the Creator to bring people to join us. The ideas and energies there are extraordinary, especially of these young people learning purposefully to make change in environmental and other policy areas. What are the science, governmental, and humanistic principles of this ongoing curriculum? How can other youth nationally participate? Is there a need for educators to become more activist in general in order to update and innovate upon education that matters and compels? Much of what I have learned and can offer has been in my direct encounter with peoples and landscapes. These have been the most powerful teachers of my life. Is there potential academic benefit for students to intern in my model of encounter and immersion in Native American reality? Furthermore, can we learn to see through Indigenous eyes? So let me return to the issue of stereotypes before I wrap up. This is what happens when you Google African American. This is what do we see here, folks? I don't know how Donald Trump made it in there. He seems to sneak his way everywhere. He's like that sneaky buffalo that will not go away. I did this morning. But look, what we see is people of this era, right? We see people in suits, we see a bald-headed fellow, we see a family smiling. This is what happens here when we Google Asian American. We see American flags, we see people smiling. This is what happens when we Google Latino or Hispanic, same. And this is what happens when we Google Native American. These are the images that we see when we're represented in massive media. Take a look at the text at the top. Female, man, teenager, drunk. These are the common associated terms that people pair with Native American when they do the Google search. This is the ongoing algorithm. This is real time. And this is the experience that our children are having. Native American stereotypes are ingrained in the fabric of our country as historical people, as tribal and inferior, and most contemporary depictions of Native Americans include the noble savage, redskins, spiritual beings, creatures fit for mascots. I propose we use these images instead. Think proud, incredible, Indian. Think Swinomish, Anishinaabe. Think of the 1491s. Think of your grandma. Think of your grandpa. Think auntie, cousin, chairman. Think Kanakamali, Tlingit, Zuni, and Pachanga. Think powerful, persevering, and thriving. Think of Bahajoni, and Peaches, and Brandon, and tribal royalty. Think musician, PhD, elder, and fashionista. Think loving, Paiute, Supai, Tulalip, and Crow. Think entrepreneur, filmmaker, scholar, holyman, and fisherman. Think superintendent, fierce, veteran, educator. Think of our families. Think of us as human beings. The Native American youth I've encountered understand that there is another profound knowledge system. It's indigenous intelligence. Our elders are struggling to pass it on to our children with complete mockery and resistance from the school system and other knowledge brokers at large. Think media, higher education, just about every other standardized learning pathway. And the suppression and rejection of this intelligence, which is complete, coherent, valid knowledge systems, is part of why our children are unsettled and dissatisfied. They've expressed this to us in so many ways. They expressed it to me last week when I went to their funerals. Their inability to access intelligence arising from their own people, the kernels of which wait in their beings for activation, makes them alienated and stressed academically with related social consequences. Our children exist with absence, as if part of their minds have been locked away. though they can hear the voices of knowledge calling them to be liberated and to transform them. The return and validation of Native American knowledge systems can occur. It is timely, and their reemergences must be met with widespread welcome and celebration. So, let me recap a few admittedly visionary, but actually pragmatic and doable education projects. Language and story, preservation and recovery through dedicated linguists and scholars, and then allowing native languages to fulfill foreign language requirements. 2, geographical study of First Peoples, territories, national organizations, stewardship concepts, and other fundamentals all deserve space in our classrooms. And 3, the study of indigenous political concepts, tricameral government, for example, borrowed by Europeans in nation-making and the role of female leadership. This should be standard in constitutional history and leadership training. So I leave you with this question. What would be the curriculum design of Indigenous intelligence? What core units can we create? And are you ready to become an ally of the important transference of Indigenous intelligence? And to close this circle in a good way, as my elders have taught me, I'd like to share a healing song with you so that we can bring our hearts and minds together to pray for our children, for our systems that so desperately need change, and for the courage to do so. And so I ask that you sing with me. If you sing, you stand. If you stand, you pray. If you pray. And whatever the way that works out for you, we'll close that this way. This song comes from a house it. It means we're inviting the Creator into the space, and we're inviting the Creator into our mind to help us bring our minds together.
So the answer to are we ready to be her ally is yes. Is yes. Thank you. That was powerful. That was amazing. We have a little gift for you. This is, because I wrote it. And my husband did the art. And it's all about rabble-rousers for fearless social justice. And there's no one we would think more of.